Welcome everyone to GLR Learning Tuesdays. Thank you for choosing to join us today for this learning and sharing event. As folks gather, we encourage you to join the conversation via social media. Follow us at Reading by Third on Twitter, and then like the Campaign for Grade Level Reading on Facebook. You can find us by searching or or facebook.com/campaign4GLR. We have two hashtags. They are hashtag GLReading and hashtag Learning Tuesdays. You can use those hashtags to find other conversations that are going on about this and other webinars. And we will begin at the top of the hour.
Hello everyone, and welcome to GLR Learning Tuesdays. My name is Ginger Young, and I will be co-moderating today's webinar with Gina Martinez-Keddy from Parent Teacher Home Visits. Before we get started, I would like to do 3 quick bits of housekeeping. Everybody starts out muted, so please stay muted throughout this exchange. You will notice that on the right, you can enable a Zoom group chat box. That is the place to both introduce yourself when you're in the webinar. Go ahead and start logging in with who you are and which organization you're from, funder or campaign community, whatever. And throughout the webinar, if you have questions that come up that you'd like us to answer and put to our panelists, just put them there. I will be tracking those throughout the hour and a half we're together and bringing them back to the team to answer and dig into when the time is right. At the end of this webinar, you will get a short survey invitation. We'd be really grateful if you would fill it out. We'll prompt you at the end of the 90 minutes to go ahead and do that. This will help us make sure we can give you a fantastic experience with future webinars as well. And I now see that the Zoom logins from different people on this webinar are coming in. Keep them coming. We love to know who's on the line. And now we're ready to go. We are delighted you can join us for GLR Learning Tuesdays. Every Tuesday at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, you can expect a learning event powered by the Campaign for Grade Level Reading. We are using this webinar format as a portal to access and explore the best science, strategies, programs, and ideas. And we hope that these conversations will inform, inspire, and energize you in your work with an eclectic mix of presenters who will share their knowledge derived of research, practice, and lived experience. GLR Learning Tuesdays continues today with the third in the series of the Productive Parent-Teacher Partnership webinars. Supported by the Carnegie Corporation of New York, this series builds on what we all know from research, experience, and common sense. Strong, positive relationships between parents and their child's teacher are essential to student success. This series is designed to encourage stakeholders in prioritizing, investing in, and supporting a blended model approach that promotes strong, positive relationships between parents and teachers. The first webinar in this Productive Parent-Teacher Partnership series was entitled The Essential Ingredients in Building Productive Parent-Teacher Partnerships. The second was entitled Prioritizing the Parent-Teacher Relationship, Lessons from 50 Years of Research and Practice. You can find the archived webinar recordings and slide decks from each of these webinars, as well as today's webinar on Clip. We'll be putting the one on Clip from today very shortly. And now we are honored to proceed with today's webinar, which is entitled Making Hopes and Dreams the Center of the Parent-Teacher Relationship. I'm delighted now to introduce you to our four panelists. First up is Gina Martinez-Keddy, the Executive Director of Parent-Teacher Home Visits. As a community organizer in the late 90s, Gina worked with parents and other organizers to help launch PTHV in Sacramento, California, then rejoined PTHV as Executive Director in June 2017. In the intervening years, she served as Executive Director, Director of Professional Development, and consultant in the field of community and parent organizing. She earned an MBA from UCLA and an MA in Social and Cultural Studies and Education from UC Berkeley. We also have with us today Carmen Avila, originally from Mexico and currently living in Commerce City, Colorado, with her husband and their 5 children. Carmen is actively involved in her community and her children's schools. She is a national trainer for parent-teacher home visits and recently had a guest blog published in Education Post about the impact of home visits on her and her family's life. We also have with us today Don Diehl. He's been teaching, tutoring, and training teachers for the last 30 years since he was a Peace Corps volunteer in Honduras in 1990. He has taught internationally in both Detroit public schools and Denver public schools. Most of that time, Don was a bilingual teacher of all subjects at the 5th grade level. He now runs his own private tutoring business in Denver, working with kids of all ages. He has been involved with Parent-Teacher Home Visit program for the last 18 years in a variety of capacities. He helped start the home visit program in Denver Public Schools about 10 years ago. He is now also a national trainer for parent-teacher home visits. And finally, we have with us today Teresa Cummings, who holds a PhD from the University of Illinois, Chicago, and who has worked in the education field for over 27 years. Her work as a teacher, administrator, and curriculum developer has spanned the breadth of the education community from pre-K through 12th grade through community college and university levels. Teresa, too, has been a part of the parent-teacher home visit work for over a decade as a teacher, trainer, and national evaluation consultant. So today we're going to start with Gina. Gina, we'd love to hear from you a little bit about the brief history of parent-teacher home visits and the model that you've built. What highlights can you share with us about the history of your organization and how it works today?
Yeah, thanks, Ginger. It's great to be here today. So parent-teacher home visits is really all about helping parents and teachers build relationships of trust so that they can then work together as really true partners in educating children. And we do that by providing training and support to schools and school districts that want to implement our model of relationship building home visits. So we started in 1996 in Sacramento, California, excuse me, as a community organizing campaign. And it started because there were a group of parents who were painfully aware that there was a breakdown in trust and communication between them and their children's schools and teachers. And there were also some teachers that were involved in the community organizing effort, and they also knew that about that breakdown. But they also knew that some of them were doing actually home visits and were getting incredible results in restoring that trust. And so the parents and the teachers began to talk more and really wanted to find a way to systematize that home visit practice within the school district. So they approached the teachers union, and the teachers union was immediately very supportive of it. And then they approached the school district, who after a little while was also supportive and provided funding and a structure to launch the pilot project in 8 schools. It started as a collaborative effort among these 3 local organizations, and we believe that that partnership has really helped sustain the practice over time in Sacramento and in other communities across the country. So today, whenever anybody asks us about starting a home visit practice in their community, we always encourage them to find a similar partnership that will help launch and grow and sustain the effort over time. So next slide. So we started in 8 schools in 1 neighborhood, and we began to grow over time, primarily through word of mouth, as people began to hear about what we were doing and see the results that we were getting. They started calling us and asking us to help them replicate the practice in their local community. So today we have trained in 26 states plus DC, and our home visit teachers from across the country have been doing about 50,000 home visits every year for the past few years. Next slide. So what is the home visit model that we have? We are well aware that there's lots of different ways to do home visits, lots of different models out there that have their different purposes and their different focus. For us, as I said, our focus is really about building those relationships of trust between parents and teachers. So I'm going to share these 5 core practices that we consider to be really non-negotiable to our model. And these really make up the heart of our model. So I'm going to share them pretty quickly. The first one is that visits are voluntary for all. So they're voluntary for teachers and they're voluntary for parents and families. We want people to want to participate in this model and this practice. We feel that because we are about building relationships of trust, that it would be difficult to mandate that. So we always want to make sure that our visits are voluntary for all. The second core practice is that educators are trained and compensated. So we provide the training, and then from the very beginning, our founding parents actually, it was important for them to make sure that teachers were compensated for their home visit time, because they wanted to make sure that home visits were not going to be one more thing that teachers were expected to do on their own time and out of their own pocketbook. So teachers getting compensated has been something important from the very beginning. The third core practice is that we share hopes and dreams. So in every initial home visit, we always encourage educators to ask the parent, what are your hopes and dreams for your child? And we
Gina,
always
hold just a
ask
moment.
the
Let me mute everyone
educator,
and unmute you.
we always ask the educator to be prepared to answer that question as well. So the question is, what are your hopes and dreams for your child? And you can imagine that that question begins to open up a whole different kind of conversation, where parents and teachers can begin to realize that their hopes and dreams for that child are really probably not too far apart from each other. And they can begin to realize that maybe they can really partner together in a meaningful way to begin to realize those hopes and dreams. The fourth core practice is that we don't target students. So this model was really designed to benefit all students. So it's not just for the kids who are chronically absent, or it's not just for the kids that are excelling academically, or it's not just for the kids that are in sports. But it really is designed for all kids. We don't want it to be, to carry any kind of stigma or privilege that's really not available to all. And then the last core practice is that educators go in pairs and reflect on the visit afterwards. So the practice of doing home visits is often something very new for teachers. And so in the beginning, we really wanted to make sure that teachers went in pairs just to provide that sense of psychological safety as you're doing something that you're unfamiliar with. But what we found over the years was that going in pairs also was very important to have an extra set of eyes and ears during the home visit where the two educators can then reflect afterwards. Because we ask educators to go into that home visit pretty much empty-handed. So we do not want them to take a notepad to take notes during the visit. So we do not want that. Or we do not want them to take in a stack of papers or forms to sign or anything like that. But we really want them to be present to building that relationship during the visit itself. But after the visit, we do encourage the two educators to reflect together and share those mental notes that they might have taken during the visit about what they saw or what they learned that they could then take back into the classroom to help motivate and educate that child better. So, so these 5 core practices, like I said, really make up the heart of our model. And we always say if you're doing these 5 things, basically, you know, you're being consistent with our model. But outside of these 5 things, there's a whole lot of flexibility to adapt the model to local communities. So that's kind of our model conceptually. But what I always think that it's much more compelling when we hear about people's own experiences of the model. And so I want to invite Carmen to join us. Carmen, as a parent who has received a home visit, I wanted to ask if you would be willing to share what your experience of the visit was like and the impact that it had on you and your family.
Of course. Hi, well, let me introduce myself. My name is Carmen Avila. I am from Mexico. I was born and raised in a town called Ciudad Juarez. I have 5 children, ages 21, 19, 17, 11, and 9. I was growing up in school, growing up in Mexico, I'm sorry. The one thing I hated was going to school. I even dreaded going to school. And reason why was because my teachers didn't know how to deal with my ADHD. I don't think anyone back in the 80s knew what that condition was. So instead I was bullied, humiliated, isolated. So that wasn't a very good experience for me. And all this because I wasn't smart or I couldn't learn or keep up the pace like the other students. So at the age of 13, I moved to Colorado. I was enrolled in a public school. That's where I picked up some of my English. But later, I dropped out of school for lack of interest. And so I wanted to get a job so I can help out the family with the bills and everything. So long story short, I met my husband and we now have 5 beautiful children. But when it was my children's turn to go to school, that's when I felt like I wasn't very supported. And by that, I mean, I didn't like going to parent-teacher conferences. I didn't like to participate in any school activities. And so my kids struggled a lot. Forward to 2016, in April, I got a very unusual phone call by my daughter's, Amanda's teacher. She wanted to schedule a home visit. Since I never heard of these home visits before, I was kind of uneasy about it. And since Amanda wasn't doing good in school, she had so many absences, mostly unexcused. And so I thought I was being tricked into something. And so although I had agreed to this home visit, back in my mind, I was thinking, I'm gonna find something, a very good excuse to cancel this appointment. So that was that until my girls came home from school and they were all happy that their teacher was going to pay us a visit. And so I thought to myself, well, so much for that. Then when the actual visit happened, I kind of just, did it for my girls. But I was still very nervous and anxious. And I think they sensed that, because as they came in and sat at my kitchen's table, the first couple of minutes I was kind of ignored by them. They were talking to my girls, and they were talking about a recent field trip and or their experience in a recent marathon and how much fun they had. And so I noticed this connection between them, my girls and their teacher, and I saw this very nice relationship, very nice friendship, that I kind of started to relax a little bit. So then she turned over to me and asked me that question that I'll never forget. I guess I'll never forget it because I didn't have an answer to that. I wasn't prepared for what she was gonna ask. And that's when she said, "What are your hopes and dreams for your daughters, Emily and Amanda?" And so right then I was quiet. You could hear crickets. I wasn't ready for that. And coming from an educator, and because of my own personal experience, I wasn't really expecting that. So then we started talking about hopes and dreams for my girls. Right then and there, all my assumptions, all my fears went away about what I thought about teachers and the education system and everything. It was just right then, it was all put at ease for me. So then the next 45 minutes, we talked about hopes and dreams. We took pictures after that, and I was invited to the school for the following week. It was Spirit Week, I think. And we dressed up. I dressed up in a pajama. We did the crazy hair day, the cowboy day, you name it. So they took notice of that, and so did my girls. My girls loved it, that for the first time their mom was participating in something. And I did notice an immediate change in their attitude, their behavior. They were more motivated to get up every morning and go to school, do their homework. Their grades went up. And for the first time, I began communicating with my daughter's teachers so that, we can help them improve in any way. No more chronic absences or anything like that. At that time, my 18-year-old son, Nicholas, had dropped out of high school. And so I encouraged him to go back to school. He did, and he graduated the next year with an invitation to a local community college. So he kind of set up a trend for the rest of my kids. Now, who would have thought, that this home visit will be a life-changing experience for my entire family. Later that year, I was asked to share my experience in a PTHV training, and that's how I got involved. I met some wonderful trainers, and my partner and mentor, Mr. Diehl. He's helped me so much. And we became PTHV certified. So now we certified trainers, and now we go around the nation training and doing trainings. I'm a huge promoter, a huge supporter of this. I tell every parent that I know, every teacher that I know, what I do and how this experience has changed my life. Everybody's, my entire family. And so when I sit down at the lunchroom and I talk to other parents, I tell them, if you ever get a phone call, say yes. You won't regret it. It's changed. It's changed my life. This program really, really works. And I am living proof of that. So trust me, just say yes. That's it for me. Thank you so much for your time. And I'll pass it over to Gina.
Thank you, Carmen. I am always so inspired by your story. Thank you so much for sharing it. And I just want to say that you are one of the smartest people I know. So I just want to point that out. Teresa, I want to ask you to join the conversation at this point because Carmen talked about how the home visit helped her children do better in school. And I wanted to see if you, Teresa, could share some of the research that shows similar kinds of outcomes for students nationally.
Thank you, Gina. I'm really excited to be here and be a part of this conversation. As I started the home visits as a teacher in the early 2000s, just a couple of years after it had gotten started. So when I was asked to oversee the national evaluation, I said absolutely yes. First, I'd like to thank the funders of the national evaluation, because without them, we would never have been able to do this. And that's our major funders were the Stewart Foundation, the Flamboyant Foundation, Kellogg Foundation, and the National Education Association. And then also, of course, to the districts, thank you so much for allowing us to come in, invade their space, and really study them. So I want to do a quick overview of the 3 different studies. So over the last 2 decades, we had a lot of anecdotal evidence and even some site and district level studies that showed the positive impact implementing home visits had on the participants and also on the culture of the school. However, we really wanted to look at the work from a broader perspective and understand if the findings were going to be consistent across communities nationally. So we studied 4 large districts across the US, and these 4 districts had been implementing for a number of years, but they had sites that were in different stages of implementation. And originally we thought we were just going to do 1 study, but as we dug into the work, we realized that the evaluation was actually 3 different but interconnected studies. Johns Hopkins University was the lead researcher for the student outcome study that you see in the first bullet, and then RTI International was the lead for the implementation and the mindset shift study. For the student outcome study, we looked at what was the impact of home visits on academic performance and chronic absenteeism. And then for the implementation study, this was really our fidelity study. We wanted to see if sites were following the 5 core practices that Gina discussed earlier as non-negotiables. And then if the school sites weren't following to fidelity, we wanted to understand why and what the impact was, whether it was positive or negative. For the mindset shift study, we looked at the impact home visits had on participants' implicit biases. And we defined implicit biases as automatic or unconscious. So that's the overview, and I'm going to go into each study a little bit deeper. So for the student outcome study, we took different lenses. So as you heard from Carmen, the impact one home visit can have on a family is very powerful. And we saw this across our 4 districts. For student level implications, we took all of the student data nationally, and then we sort of put it into one bucket. And we looked at students who had a home visit versus students who didn't have a home visit. And what we found is that students who had a home visit and participated in the home visit were 21% less likely to be chronically absent the year after they had the home visit. Then we also looked at academic achievement, but we didn't see a statistically significant impact to English language arts nor math standardized tests. And I wasn't surprised by this at all, because remember, we were taking all students nationally and putting into a bucket. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a second, but let's go to the school level implications. Here we looked at site level implications, and we were looking at schools who visited at least 10% of their students versus schools who didn't visit any students or visited less than 10% of their students. And we call these schools who visited at least 10% of their students or more systematic implementers. So we found that students attending a school who visited at least 10% of their students were 22% less likely to be chronically absent and 35% more likely to be proficient on English language arts state standard tests. So knowing the work, I said before, I wasn't surprised about the student level outcomes. Knowing the work and knowing the impact this work has had on myself, as well as my husband, who also was a parent-teacher home visit teacher, and then the many teachers I've had conversations with, when you change your teaching and learning, you change it for all of the kids in your class, not just the kids who you went to go visit their homes. And one of the things that I've really seen personally, as well as in teachers I've had discussions with across the nation and in this research study, is that the effect and the impact not only touched the students whose teachers were doing the home visit, all the students whose teachers were doing the home visit, not just the ones who received the visit. And that's what we saw with the school level implications. Go ahead, next slide. So I'm going to talk about the implementation study before I get into the mindset shift study. So as you heard from Gina, the 5 core practices were created over 20 years ago because teachers, parents, and community organizers really believed in their heads and their hearts that these were the practices that were critical if we wanted to keep this work focused on building relationships. And one of our main goals of the implementation evaluation was to try and understand from a research standpoint why each non-negotiable was critical to building collaborative relationships between the families and the educators, especially relationships that broke through the racial and cultural differences that we often see in educational communities. In our study, we found that the 5 core practices really should remain non-negotiables. The districts that we studied and examined, they adhered to the core practices as non-negotiables when they were implementing the work. And they reported relational outcomes related to the home visit. And so we saw the positive impact from the outcome study to schools, students, and families across the 4 districts when these districts adhered to the core practices as non-negotiables. But also, stakeholders told us that these components were really important to reaching those outcomes. And so they really emphasized the importance of holding these 5 core practices as non-negotiables. But more than that, in our research, we found that the parent-teacher home visit is backed by science of how intergroup relationships are formed, especially those that shift the biases, both biases we have and we know we have, which are the conscious ones, and biases we don't even know we have, which are the unconscious or implicit biases. And even through research, even though research was not used by the founding members, over 20 years ago as they built this model, in our current study, we found that these 5 components are aligned with research-supported best practice strategies for reducing implicit biases and discriminatory behaviors and building relationships, positive, mutually respectful, trusting relationships. This model is not just a random sort of set of things to do, but it really is interrelated components that are critical to building and maintaining the relationship. And for me, this was just a really good reminder that those closest to the kids, the families, the teachers, and the community really do know what they're talking about, because those are the folks that built this model over 20 years ago, even without the research. And so, as you see on this slide, we asked ourselves, are these 5 components critical? And it was a resounding yes, whether it was from the participants and the practitioners, whether it was from the research, it was a definite yes. Now, this work isn't a magic bullet, and it should not be viewed as work to be implemented to fix something or fix someone or fix chronic absenteeism or increase academic achievement. Relationships really matter. And when the home visit work is implemented to fidelity and follows the 5 core practices as non-negotiables, you will see the impact. But this work is about building genuine, trusting, and mutually respectful relationships. and truly understanding what our students' hopes and dreams are and what the family's hopes and dreams are for their children. And we can't do that if we're talking about absenteeism or academic achievement. We can only do that with authentic, real relationship discussions. And so I'll talk a little bit more about the study that focused on the impact parent-teacher home visits had on the participants' mindset. But first, I want to invite Don to talk about his experience with the work. Don?
Hold on. Can everybody hear me? Okay. So hi.
I can hear you.
My name is Don Diehl. I'm a retired fifth grade teacher in Denver, Colorado. And I want to tell you a little story right now that I think might bring some of this data that Teresa was just sharing come to life a little bit. So, you know, I've been teaching a long time. I got involved in the home visit project 18 years ago. But I want to tell you a story about this student named Rudy and his mom. I taught fifth grade, but I met Rudy when he was in third grade. And I would meet him in the hallway outside of his third grade classroom when he was in a rage, and he would be pacing back and forth up and down the hallway. And just completely frustrated, irritated, and angry, in a complete and total rage, and had been kicked out of his classroom for certain behaviors. And I would always see him in the hallway in trouble. Now, Rudy was a big guy, okay? He sort of looked to me like the Maui character in the Disney movie Moana, just a big guy. His shoulders were bigger than mine. He was as tall as I was, even in third and fourth grade. And I knew that when he was going to come into my classroom, I was just like, boy, this kid's gonna, he could beat me up. That's what I was really thinking. I mean, he could hurt me because I always saw him when he was angry. I always saw him when he was in those rages, and he was bigger than me. And so I never said it out loud, but I was afraid of having Rudy come into my classroom, honestly. So that was long before he ever came into my room, long before he ever was my student. I heard a lot of gossip about his mother as well. People around the school had contact with his mom, and, oh, look out for her, and, oh my gosh, she's scary, and, oh, she'll cuss you out in a second, and oh yeah, she went off on the office staff the other day, and you know, you hear this gossip, and I didn't even know if it was true or not. I had seen Mom through the hallways walking along. She was bigger than Rudy was. She was bigger than me. Again, I started to feel intimidated and a little scared. She didn't look like anybody I wanted to have any confrontation with. And so I didn't say that out loud, but I was a little scared about getting to know her. I'll just say right now too, physically, she had tattoos that were down her neck and all around her chest area and stuff. And just these tattoos were very intimidating again to me. I started telling myself all these crazy stories in my head, but I believed them. I'm like, oh, she must have been in prison. Those look like prison tattoos. and yeah, maybe she was in a gang, and oh boy, she could really hurt me. And so these were all these crazy thoughts that I had had long before Rudy actually became my student. And so the other thing that happened before the first day of school was that I received a stack of paperwork about Rudy, all of his test scores and things. And that was the first time I realized just how low academically Rudy was. He was reading at a kindergarten reading level, and he was 11 and coming into my fifth grade classroom. And I immediately jumped into fear again. This time it was personal fear. I started questioning my own ability as a teacher. I'd been teaching a long time, but honestly, I don't think but to that point, I hadn't had a student that was as low a reader as Rudy was. He was almost a non-reader. And I honestly, I didn't know what I was going to do. And mixed with all my emotions of feeling afraid about him and feeling afraid of his mom and thinking that he could actually physically hurt me if he got angry and went into one of his rages. It was a big mixture of all these crazy thoughts in my head before day one. And day one finally came, and Rudy came into the classroom. And I remember that first day, I wanted Rudy to be calm. that was my goal for that day. And he sat, docile at his desk. He did not engage with anybody. There was no expression on his face. He just was in the room. He was there. He was present. And that was about it. And I ended the day, and I remember thinking, oh, phew, that's good. Got through that day without any incident. I was so nervous. But you know what? Rudy didn't really do anything that day. But I got through the day without a confrontation. Day two happened, same thing. That my goal became, let's get through the day without setting off Rudy. He did very little in class. He wasn't engaged. I didn't really hear him engage with me at all, even speak. He wouldn't really talk. And I knew, though, I had this voice in the back of my head because I'd been doing these home visits for a long time. I just said, you know what you need to do, Donnie. You need to call his mom, and you need to set up a home visit and see if they're willing to do it. And because you need to create a positive relationship. I mean, you're so nervous. You're walking on eggshells all the time. So that's what I did. I picked up the phone. I talked to my teacher partner first to figure out some dates that we could have some options to go on a home visit. We got our calendars in sync, and then I made the phone call. And I wanted to ask Mom to see if she was going to be open to this idea of me coming on a home visit. And I remember her answering the phone, and I said, "Hi, Mrs. Ornelas, this is Mr. Diehl at Fairview." And she interrupted me. She didn't even let me get that whole first sentence out. And she said, "Mr. Diehl, it's so good to hear from you. I've been waiting to hear from you. Are you calling because you want to have a home visit?" "I hope so. Boy, I've been really looking forward to Rudy coming into your class. After all these years, we've heard so many good things about you." And boom, that hit me like a freight train. You know, I had been judging this woman to the nth degree for a year prior to her coming into my room. I expected her to be one way and all negative. And there she was. And the very first thing out of her mouth was she gave me a compliment. She complimented me on my teaching even before we even started talking about teaching or Rudy or school or anything. That threw me off a little bit, but it also made me feel a little more comfortable. And I said, yes, yeah, I do want to schedule a home visit. You know that we do home visits here after all these years. And so I'm glad you've heard about it. And I would love to get to know you more. And I asked her, you know, if it would be possible. And she was totally open to the idea. And she just said, "Mr. Diehl, I do need to let you know something. I want you to know that that I am currently homeless. And so we're going to be temporarily in this unit and in these housing projects, not in the neighborhood of your school, but if you're willing to come, we'll be there for the next 2 weeks." So just even in the phone call, not even in the home visit, she was willing to trust me enough to share some of that information to me, that personal information about being homeless. And so I said, "I'll go anywhere you want." And so my teacher partner and I fast forward to the home visit. We get there, and I'll always remember this visit. It changed my life. We got there, we knocked on the door, and I'll always remember we walked into an empty room. It was tile and brick walls. I will always remember the echo. You know, it was a temporary unit. There were 3 folding chairs that she had sitting in the middle of that room. Rudy was sitting off to the side, and he was crisscross with his little sister, who I hadn't met before. She was like 2 or 3 years old, and he was bouncing her up and down on his knees, and he was smiling and giggling with his sister. I'd never seen him smile before. He was happy. He was at ease. Remember, at this point, we really hadn't even talked, and so that was a positive thing. And we came in, she sat us down in those folding chairs, my partner and I, and then she had the 3rd chair. The middle school brother came in, introduced himself. He was extremely polite. All these things, they were just so nice and so welcoming and so polite and so well-mannered. And in my mind, I had thought they were monsters, right? And it was just all starting to prove my fears wrong. And we sat down, and she welcomed us. She explained a little bit more about the homeless situation. They had been homeless most of the last year. They had been in and out of different shelters. They were waiting for Section 8 housing. She was hoping to hear back soon from a job possibility. She had to have a job to get Section 8, and she went on a job interview that day before we came on that home visit. She was really nervous, and she actually started to cry. And I'm sorry, I'm going to start crying a little bit right now, too. She started to cry and just sharing her fears of not getting that job. And it might mean that they would stay homeless. She was very vulnerable. She was extremely honest. She's extremely welcoming. And we just sat there for a minute and cried. And then I asked, I said, what are your hopes and dreams for Rudy? You know, that's the only thing that we're supposed to ask on this kind of a home visit. What are your hopes and dreams? And she started to cry even more. And she said, I just want Rudy to learn how to read. And I just broke down and I started bawling. I said, that's what I want too. And I actually shared out loud to this woman in that room. And I actually said, but I'm not sure exactly how to do that. I'm nervous that I won't be able to. And I shared those fears with her about my own. I actually said them out loud. I'd never said it out loud before that moment. And a huge weight came off of my shoulders. And I said, you know what? But I think I can find people to help me. And that was a moment when I started to remember that I needed to try to be accepting of help. I need to ask for help. I can't solve every single problem every single minute of every day. And I became a better teacher right then because I realized that it was okay to ask for help and to tell her that I needed help. It was okay to tell the truth. And we did, and we cried there, and we just started laughing. To ease the tension, I asked her, I said, you know, tell me about these tattoos, these incredible tattoos that you have. I see them all over you, and what do some of them mean? And because, you know, I had a big fear about those tattoos, you know, and that she was going to hurt me and everything. But she told me this wonderful story about her sister who was an artist, a tattoo artist. And she and her sister had designed this one and designed this one. And they told me the story about this tattoo and that tattoo. And they had meaning. They were about love. They were about a relationship between 2 sisters. And none of my fears, none of my stereotypes that I had in my head were true. Not a single one. And that I wouldn't have learned that if we hadn't been sitting there crying and laughing together in that empty room that day. I finally turned over to Rudy and I said, hey, Rudy, what are your hopes and dreams? And he just looked right at me. He's bouncing his sister up and down on his knee. And he said, you know, Mr. Diehl, I think someday I want to be an archaeologist or a paleontologist. And just like blew my mind. I'm like, what do you know about that kind of stuff? What are you talking about, Rudy? He still hadn't even really spoken to me in the classroom. And that came out of his mouth. And he said, yeah, I know a whole lot, Mr. Diehl. You know, I watched the Nature Channel, I watched the Discovery Channel, I watched the History Channel, and I watched all these incredible shows, and I know a whole lot about archaeology and paleontology. You know, I also know some medieval history, Mr. Diehl. And he went into this whole thing. He told me this is all about medieval castles, and he talked for like 15 minutes and he wouldn't stop. And all of this just sitting on the floor in this empty room in this temporary housing project, with me on a folding chair. And that was when the whole world opened up for me. I was like, you know, now I know how I can approach this teaching of Rudy that I was so nervous and scared about. Now I can't do it. Well, yeah, I could. I realized I could bring in video and audio and history and science and bring in all these amazing things that he's interested in and have him learn how to read through that. And I could ask for help. And that's what I learned at that moment. And I never would have gotten to that point if we hadn't been on that home visit. And if I hadn't asked that simple question, what are your hopes and dreams? And, you know, fast forward, and, you know, Rudy back in the classroom completely changed. He began to talk in class. He began to communicate with me. He talked with his classmates more. He participated in our activities at school to the point that he actually shared to the whole class the fact that he was homeless and had been homeless most of that year. He talked about how it needed to become a focus of our whole class because we were working on public policies, and it was amazing. He led this huge project about homelessness and how it affects students and families that year, and took it to the state legislature and made a presentation at the state capitol. You know, this kid that I thought wasn't going to be able to do anything. And it was amazing. He soared that year. We got him up to a second grade reading level. My team, all these people I invited into the room, and all of it started on that day when we made that home visit, and I created a relationship with his mom and with him. And that never would have happened if I hadn't done that. His mom did participate in our activities at school too in a positive way, and she never cussed us out. She never did any of those horrible things we all were afraid of. She was a wonderful mother, a wonderful caretaker, a survivor, and she was a volunteer, and just it was an amazing year that year. And so I hope that story helps some of you understand that this kind of home visit is all about relationship building and all about trust. And I'm going to turn it back over to Teresa now, and she'll take it back into some of the data that we know this really works. Thanks for letting me share.
Thank you, Dawn, so much. I love your story, and from the comments in the chat box, so does the folks out in our webinar as well. As you heard from Dawn and Carmen, this work really has a positive impact, not only on the educators, but the families as well, and how they see each other. And I want to be really honest here. Dawn and Carmen's story are amazing, but they're not the only ones out there. Like, we didn't just bring the two people that have the best amazing stories. Like, there are hundreds of these stories out there over the last 20 years that we have, hundreds, if not thousands. The impact that just one home visit can have when done in this manner is really powerful. I want to get into the mindset shift study a little bit. We saw the discussion that you heard, or the stories that you heard from Dawn and Carmen, we saw this nationally. And what we saw in the mindset shift study was really these visits impacted how teachers and families saw each other, how they felt about each other, and how they interacted, just even after one home visit. As a quick reminder, the mindset shift study was really taking a look at what the impact of the parent-teacher home visit had on conscious and unconscious biases, which we the unconscious biases we call implicit. So obviously studying biases that people don't even know that they have, we didn't think was going to be very easy, but we did have enough evidence from over the 20 years of implementation and stories like Dawn's, and personal experiences and conversations that the impact of this work really did disrupt biases, both unconscious and conscious. So we felt confident about going into the mindset shift studies from the lens of both parents and educators. And for me, I've personally heard teachers say, like, I didn't even realize that I felt that way. And that really is those unconscious biases coming to the conscious. And that's one of the aspects of this work. So in the study, both educators and families reported shifts in their mindsets about one another, their attitudes, their beliefs, and their behaviors. And these behaviors and beliefs fell along racial, cultural, and socioeconomic lines. Both educators and families reported that they gained a better understanding of the other person and no longer held their prior assumptions. Not only did they think differently after the visit, but more importantly, they acted differently as well. So educators really felt more comfortable interacting with the families, as well as the families interacting with the educators. And this led to deepening relationships. I want to get into the educator mindset a little bit, and there's a couple quotes that you can read through. But the educators reported how they shifted their assumptions about the families, which we categorize as a shift from focusing on the deficits to recognizing the assets and valuing the families. And educators talked about how the work shifted their mindset about the home lives, the living situations of students, and also about the family's capabilities and interests to support students' education. As the first quote really illustrates, in the home visits, educators changed these assumptions that parents didn't care, were not involved, and could not support them in recognizing the opposite. They gained this new perspective of the families and students, and also developed empathy and understanding of the family and students, which you see in the second quote. Empathy also extended to disciplinary actions and situations, being more empathetic to when students are not doing what the teacher wants or acting out in a certain way. We heard over and over again how teachers reacted to these situations with more patience and understanding after doing the home visits with their students. They also reported that visits led to increased communication with the families. So let's get into the family mindsets. Across the 4 districts, we heard that family members prior to home visits saw teachers as a kind of a distant authoritarian figure. But after the home visit, they saw them as friends, and some were even surprised to see how much the teacher cared about the students. I know when I first started implementing this at the high school that I was teaching at, the kids would like give me a hard time about, driving my quote fancy car to my big mansion, on the hill, and then coming back, and I would laugh because I would say, like, I live right down the street, and I think I drove like a Subaru Justy at the time, a little 3-cylinder. And so when you go out into the homes of your kids and you have those conversations and families, and they realize that you actually care, and you live right there in their neighborhood, and it's a different dynamic that you have with each other. Families also mentioned how their students felt more connected to the teacher, which is really important. I know my kids learn from their teacher better when they feel like the teacher cares and they feel more connected to that teacher. And if you think about when you were in school, the teachers that you learned the most from, for me, it was those teachers that I felt that connection with. And because of this increased comfort, more interactions happened and families felt more comfortable asking questions and talking with educators and follow-up communication, which is exactly what we really wanted to happen when we started this work over 20 years ago. So if you think about all three of these studies and the stories that you heard from Dawn and Carmen, you know, these findings from all three of these studies build on previous research suggesting the positive impact of the home visits have on students, families, and the educators, and really affirming the need for schools to connect better with families who have traditionally been isolated from their children's school. And before I turn it back over to Ginger for question and answers, I really want to emphasize, I see that there's folks on the line here that are either in administrative roles or central office or foundations, and I appreciate you all being here just as I appreciate the educators being here. But I would like to really emphasize that home visit practice is not only about making a difference in the school experience of individual students and families, but it's about reshaping the culture of the entire school to build more trust with families. And in order to do this, you have to really lead with focusing on building relationships. You cannot implement this, like I said before, to fix chronic absenteeism, to address like a negative culture that you have on your campus, or to increase your English language arts or math proficiency. You have to lead with this work by extending the bridge out into the community and out into the families and welcoming them and talking about hopes and dreams and building on those, really building those authentic, trusting relationships. So thank you so much for your time. Ginger?
Thank you, Teresa, and thank you to all our amazing panelists. I have done a bunch of these webinars, and I don't think I've ever seen the chat box blow up quite the way this one has. I have been tracking the questions from the very beginning, but I'm gonna cut the line with one that I think a lot of us are wondering, and that's, and we'll come back to them in order, but Dawn, we all want to know what happened to Rudy and how he's doing today. You need to unmute.
Oh,
Good.
Okay. There we go. I think, there we are. So the last that I heard was about 3 years ago. I looked him up on some social media. I did see that he was involved in a community garden, which made me really happy because we ran a community garden that year. That's all I know. I have not seen him since he left my classroom physically in 5th grade. That's what I know at this point. That's all I know.
Well, thank you. I think everybody on this webinar is rooting for him. So thank you so much for sharing that. I'm going to just start at the top and work down, and we make it a little organic here because a lot of these questions are overlapping and there's some common themes here, but I want to go back to the very first question we got way back at the top of the hour, or near the top of the hour, from Llewellyn Cooper in Birmingham, which is a question about whether prior permission
I'm gonna beat this woman if she doesn't stop.
for parent-teacher home visits. So curious about what Gina and team, what is the sort of precondition that's needed for permissions to be able to do these home visits?
So as one of the 5 non-negotiables is that it is voluntary for all. And
Right.
so we all, and also our visits are not drop-in visits. So they're always scheduled in advance and ahead of time. So we ask the teachers to make sure that they are making phone calls to the family and asking them if they're willing to have them come and do a home visit. And so it's all kind of verbal. And if the family agrees, they set up a mutually agreeable time and location. And if not, it is voluntary for all. And so if the family is sure that they just absolutely do not want a home visit, then, that's okay too under this model. We also always encourage schools to, teachers get trained on how to do this ahead of time, and so they have some time to explore it and practice it and consider it. But we also encourage schools to do some work up front to let parents know what's happening as well. So it's not just kind of sprung on them as a surprise, but to make announcements at parent meetings, or send put it in the newsletter, or send notes home to let parents know that this is what's happening in the school, and so that they just know that they're not being singled out by their child's teacher for a home visit, but that it is really something that the school is trying to do across the board.
Great, thank you. And we had a question from Becky Miles-Polka in Iowa, who noticed Iowa on the map of states that have received this. And she wanted to know, how can we find out where there has been training in our state? That's something many of us may be wondering, actually.
Yeah, and so I am not recalling offhand where in Iowa we did the training. It was a long time ago, I think. But on our website, you can go and see all the different places where we've trained. And also, please feel free, there's the contact information. Contact me, my email is there. Also on our website, you can find our phone number. You can reach out to us anytime for specifics about where we have trained and other information. We're always happy to talk to people.
That's great, thank you. We had several questions from Elisa Mitchell at the Community Foundation of Sarasota County, Florida. So I'm gonna run through them. First was, who pays the teachers? Does the school board? How does that financing model work?
Yeah, so typically the school district will need to find the budget to pay for the teachers. The vast majority of home visits take place in Title I schools, and so there are family engagement or Title I family engagement dollars that are available, and that is far and away the most common funding source for home visits and for those teacher stipends. But there are also lots of other sources. So there's also other federal title dollars. Title II, I think, is for professional development. Title III for English learner communities. And then also, there are a number of instances where the local community, whether it's through local community foundations, teachers unions sometimes will contribute to it, other local kind of businesses or organizations that also support the work.
Also from Elisa was the question of, what happens when a teacher doesn't want to participate? What happens to the kids in that class?
Yeah, it is voluntary for all, and so sometimes there will be teachers that do not choose to participate. Our model also encourages every staff member basically at a school site to get the home visit training, and a lot of those staff members can go as a partner to classroom teachers to do the home visit. And so hopefully, it could be worked out where even if that child's teacher does not want to do a home visit, that they might be able to get some kind of a home visit with a staff person who's not the classroom teacher.
Okay.
Can I?
And I don't know if any are, Don, or Teresa, if you have any other comments.
So at our school, what I noticed that the kids are the #1 biggest cheerleaders of the program. And so if I was doing home visits in my classroom and you were not doing home visits next door in your classroom, the kids are talking about the home visits, and they would pressure that teacher next door to do a home visit themselves. And that's what brought a lot of teachers who were not sure about doing this whole thing. That's what brought them into the fold, were the kids.
Wow. And Carmen, I think you said earlier that there were a lot of parents waiting at your school, at the schools where your kids were, to get these home visits. So it feels a little bit like the culture and the climate may be very receptive to this once the ball is rolling.
Yes,
Yeah, and oh, go ahead, Teresa.
Oh, no, I was just going to say that's what happened with us. I was at a high school, and I think there was like 3 or 4 of us that started it the first year. And we had about 110 teachers. And we visited anyone's student, like it didn't matter if it was ours or not. But then the following year, within a 1-year time, over 50% of our teachers were doing it just within 1 year. we went just from a couple of us to half the teachers on campus doing the home visits.
Wow.
Yeah, and I think it points to, I think, the importance of schools and school districts to kind of think through, you know, there are going to be teachers that are just going to feel like this is not something that they're going to want to do. And then there are going to be teachers who are just immediately drawn to it and are going to do it. And then there's a whole group in between that are kind of on the fence or a little bit hesitant, and all they need is that extra support or extra push or that extra encouragement. And so we do always encourage schools and school districts to be thinking about, you know, how, you know, what are some things that we can do to support those teachers that are kind of, you know, that would do them, but they just need that extra little bit of support.
Carmen, did you have anything to add?
Oh, no, just the same. These parents that are, like I said, I'm a huge cheerleader to this program, like Dawn says. And so some of these parents are wondering whether this is a real thing or not because they haven't gotten a visit. But I tell them, you know, I tell everyone that I know, and it's just a matter of time. They will be getting the visits. So there is a lot of people out there waiting for them. So.
And let me bring up a question that Andrea Doggett from United Way Suncoast asked, which occurred to me too when Teresa was mentioning high school, and Don, you're talking about 5th grade. Is there a specific grade that you all recommend to having these visits happen, or is it equally good across the board?
I think it's equally good across the board. And there's some schools, I know that in Sacramento especially, that they do transition kinds of visits. So from like the 5th grade classroom at my elementary school transitioning into a 6th grade environment in a middle school, or 8th grade transitioning into the 9th grade high school, like where Teresa taught, like they could be utilized in that way, and you could have partnerships with teachers between schools to do visits as well.
Yeah, and our model,
would definitely, go ahead, Gina.
I was just going to say our model is used all the way from pre-K through 12th grade. And yeah, Teresa, I was going to ask you to share how you did it at the high school level.
Yeah, for us, and I agree, it's pre-K all the way through 12th grade. The way that we did it is we visited our incoming freshmen. So we went out to the homes of all of our freshmen. Now, that was our first home visit, and then we visited, the second visit was in 11th grade. So then we visited our 11th graders. I was at a campus that had a pretty high transiency rate, but we still saw the impact because the community saw us out there and the family saw us out there and everybody talked about it. So just building that relationship, even if you have a high transiency rate, this work will still help change the culture on your campus, because it's just like building those relationships. So sometimes what we would do is, like a middle school, if you have a direct feeder school, if the majority of your kids come from a particular feeder middle school, you can have one of the teachers come from that middle school and one teacher come from the incoming high school. During the summer, you can do the visit so that it's sort of that gentle release. They're like saying goodbye, we're saying welcome, and we're all kind of talking about the hopes and dreams from our different perspectives.
So creating some good transitions between different school settings. Anybody else want to add to that before we move on to another question?
I was just going to say that because it was done at all grade levels in our school, it helped it became part of our school culture. And so over time, the parents expect it and come asking for it even without us initiating it over time, because it became a part of our whole school culture from 4-year-olds to 11-year-olds.
That's amazing. Let me ask a question that Brick Danique raised, which is something that I think, Carmen, you may have some insights into. The question was, how do you support parents who are reluctant or suspicious or cautious in saying yes to the home visit call that they get? Is there any, we know this is voluntary, and how do you help facilitate the sort of trust building that gets the visit to happen when a parent is willing but nervous?
Well, what helped me, and I don't know if you noticed in the beginning of my story, was that although I had plans to change, to cancel,
Yes.
what I couldn't say no to was how excited my girls were about this visit. So they came home and they said, "The teacher's coming here." They were happy about it, and how can you say no to that? So I think they knew how to get to me, and so all I can say is that seeing them, and reassuring that that this was going to be for them, it's what made me change my mind, and the entire visit, the way it happened, it just, seeing them how informal they showed up to my house, because I was expecting them to come with like bookcases and the way they were dressed. I mean, they were just so informal. Some even were wearing the school gear. That kind of helped me ease about it a little bit. So I knew I wasn't in trouble. So that I always tell them that had a huge impact on me. That they were, as they were, very informal, and just like a visit.
Yeah. Thank you.
I learned over time as a teacher just to let it go. If somebody says no, they say no, and then I could get back with them a month or two later and see if they've changed their mind. I became more accepting of that over time. At the beginning, I wanted to try to do this with everybody, no matter what, but I had to remember I have to leave it voluntary. But you know what? Again, the kids are the biggest cheerleaders, like what Carmen was saying, and other parents, and it just became a part of the culture. And people who were nervous about it changed their mind and said, "Let's give it a try." It takes a little time.
Great. And similarly to that, Donna Thompson-Bennett had a question about how teachers move beyond the fear. I think especially drawing on your experience with some early fears before you actually made the connection and everything, all your preconceived notions fell apart. What do you share with other teachers who may have some of their own preconceived judgments and fears about stepping into this home visiting work?
I think it goes to the non-negotiable about going in teams, going in pairs. Brand new teachers to our school would look at me sometimes because I had been there for a while and because I did have experience with this, and they were nervous, and they'd say, "Don, would you be willing to go on a home visit with me, because I'm really scared about doing this?" And I'd say, "Sure." And I might not even know the kid or have in contact with the kid, but that was a way that, I was just, a local expert in my school, but at other schools too, everybody, they started asking each other if they could work together. And so I think it helps staffs get to know each other better, because you might go on a home visit with a colleague that you actually don't even know too well, and you might get to know each other much better during that home visit and create a new working relationship. So the biggest thing I think is allow people to be afraid, allow people to say no. Don't say, "Well, you got to go do 5 visits," even if somebody's nervous. No, it's not going to work. Let them get there when they get there.
Yeah, I just want to add to that also that part of the training that we provide, we spend a good chunk of that training in an exercise kind of having participants uncover their own kind of barriers to doing home visits, and really trying to create that kind of a safe space for them to name some of their fears or the assumptions that they're making, or any kind of barrier that they think might be keeping them from doing home visits. And so that, I think, opens the door for even further work as people kind of move into actually doing the home visits. And also just say that we're actually taking some of the lessons learned from the national evaluation and kind of doing a bit of a redesign of our introductory training to allow for more of that to happen.
Mhm. Thank you, Gina. Karen Wesley had a question that she understands the need to go into the visits empty-handed, but she's asking if there is some kind of note-taking or documentation after the visit.
So yeah, so if the teachers want to, you know, on their way back to the school or in the car or wherever, once they have left that home visit, they're free to take notes, you know, just so that they can remember some of the key points. There are also some school districts that have integrated home visits into their student information systems, and they sometimes can create, certainly they try to use it to track the data and the student outcomes, but they will also sometimes include questions that home visiting teachers can kind of fill out to track some of their own, you know, what they learned from the home visit or any other kind of information that came out of that home visit.
In terms of the training that supports teachers to prepare for these types of visits, which you mentioned a couple of questions ago, Gina, is there any sort of documented report for people who are, for systems or schools who are thinking about this, that they could see for what information is included in that about the training and about the experience for getting teachers up and running with it?
I'm not sure I understand the question entirely, but so there's a little bit of background on what the training includes on our website. And we always encourage school districts or anybody who's thinking about launching this to contact us. We have lots and lots of conversations before anybody actually does the training, so that we can answer all the questions. We can, you know, provide some suggestions on how to set up a foundation that's really going to provide a successful launch, and go into more detail about what's included and what to expect from that training.
Fantastic. And Dawn, Chastity Rodriguez wants to know if there was a particular approach or rollout that your administration utilized to get buy-in from teachers to spread the word or get them excited to take part in this.
Yeah.
What was the early days of this to get it going?
The number one thing was our principal was in the training with us.
Oh.
And got trained too, our administration. And then she was one of the very first members of our staff who went into the community and did home visits. And so we had a leader, our principal, you know, the administration took the lead. And then also just gave shout outs, positive shout outs all the time at staff meetings, you know, once a week or whatever, you know, hey, good job. You know, Teresa did 2 home visits last week with her partner, Carmen, way to go, woohoo. Also, another thing that helped us too was that she had heard this idea from another school that was in Sacramento, and they had what they called phone bank parties. And so during like a professional development day at lunchtime, you know, our principal bought Subway sandwiches for everybody in the teacher's lounge. We all sat in there. We all had our phones. We all had our calendars. We all had our schedules. We had everything right there that we needed. And we had our class lists and phone numbers. And the goal was during that 45-minute lunch time to get on the phone with your teammates, find somebody to go on a home visit together, figure out who you're going to visit, figure out when your schedule might work together, and then actually make a phone call at that time and maybe try to make 2 or 3 phone calls and appointments during that time. And it was a school-wide thing because we were all doing it together. It was those were really fun, actually.
Yeah.
So our principal used that consistently.
So the principal was a big part of it.
Principal was the principal is the person who heard about this program and brought it into our school in the first place.
Fabulous. And we have just launched the GLR Learning Tuesdays poll, which I promised you is very brief but extremely important. So a couple more questions I want to try to get to that are very, very good questions. While we're doing that, make sure you either take the poll or plan to do it as soon as our webinar is done. We really do value this feedback. Another question we got from Andrea Doggett is, what about language barriers? How does this work if the teacher is not bilingual and the parents are only Spanish or Creole speaking? How do you all deal with that challenge?
Yeah, so it's not uncommon for that to be the case. And so because we have educators go in pairs, we always encourage, if you're a teacher that, does not speak the language of the family, try to make your second person, your second educator, someone that does speak the language and can provide that interpretation. If you can't find that person, oftentimes school sites and school districts will also have, interpretation services so draw on those opportunities as well. But we also say that, families who may not speak English fluently, they are navigating English-speaking systems every day of their lives. And so they typically have people in their own lives who help them translate and interpret kind of the English-speaking world. And so if you can't find somebody from the school or from the district, ask the family for help and see if they have somebody that they've identified that can come in and provide that interpretation. The only thing we say is that as long as it's not the student being visited that's providing the interpretation, then it's good. So
that's great. Thank you. And the Campaign for Grade Level Readings, Yoli Flores had a fantastic question, which is, has any district taken the home visits to scale? And if they have, what do we know about the impact on the district?
So I would say the two school districts across the country that have the highest number of home visits and have really integrated it the most have been Washington, D.C. and Denver, actually. And, there have been studies that have shown kind of the impact on those districts as well. And I think the findings are consistent with what we found in our national evaluation. I don't know if, Dawn, you want to speak to you were part of that Denver system and what it meant not only to experience it at your school site, but also what it was like to be part of a district-wide effort of home visits.
It was a dream of mine for years. So it was a dream come true. I ended up challenging our superintendent in a public news conference in front of hundreds of people in the news and press, and saying, would you be willing to go on a home visit with me sometime in the next 2 months? And he was not able to say no because it was public. And so I forced him into that situation. And he actually responded in a very positive way, and he did go on a home visit with me. And that's how we got it started in Denver. He came out of that home visit. We went to visit Nathaniel. I remember the superintendent, was just a guy named Tom. And Tom and Don and sitting on Nathaniel's sofa with his mom and Nathaniel talking about playing basketball. That's what we talked about. That was Nathaniel's hope and dream. And we came out of that home visit, and Tom, the superintendent, just looked at me and said, we need to duplicate this program. We need to make sure that it's in other schools other than just your school, Don. And it's not a very expensive program to run in comparison to many others. So I commit to doing that. And that's it. It just came from there. And so we got that support from that day on. It was Nathaniel who won him over.
Wow. Thank you.
Yeah.
One more content question, then I'm going to wrap up with a little bit more suggestion about how to keep going with the learning. Karen Wesley wants to know if there have been any trainings done for Head Start programs, or more generally for programs that are pre the school setting. So childcare, Head Start, that sort of thing.
Yeah, we have several places across the country that are in a pre-K environment where we have done trainings. Some of them, I believe, have been Head Start programs that wanted to kind of add a different kind of home visit into their portfolio. But yeah, so I know we've done trainings in Maryland for pre-K, in Connecticut, in Oregon. Those are the three that come to mind, but there have been more than that as well. So it's not uncommon to find, our model of home visits being practiced in the pre-K world as well.
Thank you. We are unfortunately out of time with a few questions we didn't get to. And I would just say, if you're somebody who posted a question we didn't get to, please reach out. We are all here to keep this conversation going. And you can see from our amazing shared experience today that we've got deeply committed and very effective advocates for parent-teacher home visits in this community. I want to give a huge thank you to Gina Martinez-Keddy, Carmen, Avila, Diehl, and Teresa Cummings for your time and your brilliance today. This is a fantastic conversation. I will make sure that everybody on this call gets a follow-up email with links to other resources that can be accessed to keep going down this path. In particular, on the GLR website, there is a Parents and Teachers Together webpage, which has a lot of resources and links and excellent videos on parent-teacher home visits. So we'll include that link and others to the follow-up email to this webinar.
And Ginger, can I add?
Sure, yes,
Can I add
please.
one more thing? I know somebody asked about a conference. We are actually doing a pre-conference session at this year's IEL, Family and Community Engagement and Community Schools Conference, May, I think it's 17th through 19th in LA. So take a look if you want to find out more and come to a place where there's lots of people interested in home visits. That'll be the place at our pre-conference before that conference in May in LA.
That's fantastic and great to know. So let's keep this going. Clearly, there's a lot of power in what we've heard today from our panelists. Don and Carmen, thank you so much for sharing some fairly vulnerable and really important work. Two things for everybody. Please fill out the survey. We really need your feedback. And be sure to pay attention to the upcoming Learning Tuesday webinars that are coming up. You'll see two of them on the screen now. You can go ahead and hop on and register for them, get them on your calendar. We really appreciate this chance to come together as a shared learning community and keep the progress on behalf of our kids. So it is now 4:30. I want to thank everybody for your time today, especially our amazing panelists, and tell everybody to have a great holiday season. And we'll be back on Tuesday, January 7th with a partner webinar. Take care, everybody.